Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and corruption. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. Before I do anything else, I want to wish you all a very happy new year. I hope that your 2023 is prosperous, full of joy, and that you don't experience anything kinda murdery, except of course this podcast, which I hope very much you will continue to support in the new year, maybe even lending me a hand by adding a friend or family member to our community. Since I didn't have a chance to mention it at the end of the last episode, I'm going to start off today by reminding you about the 3-digit lifeline number 988 that you can call to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thoughts. Please program it into your phone now, and if, God forbid, you're in acute crisis, please do dial 988 to receive immediate support. If you're not in acute crisis, but you would just like to connect with someone, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at Kinda Murdery on all social media or kindamurdery@gmail.com. And, as I've mentioned before, I have cerebral palsy, and I would like Kinda Murdery to be a support community for anyone with disabilities, be they physical or otherwise. And really, I'd like that support to extend beyond disability to anyone who has a life experience that is something beyond the norm. I'm hoping you'll be willing to share your stories with me, which I can keep private if you'd like, or share with our community. You see, I think that very often people who are different than us almost don't seem real. They seem like elves or fairies or something totally different that doesn't quite feel like reality to us. And that sense of other keeps us separated and makes us less compassionate. So it's my hope that if people can share their stories about the unique challenges that they face, that we'll all become a little more real, a little more human to each other, and that we can build empathy and community that way. So please do share your stories. In fact, yesterday I received an email from a listener who shared their story with me. It is a kinda murdery story, full of tragedy and drama and heartache and amazing, bizarre events. It describes a life and experiences unlike anything I've ever experienced or frankly even imagined, and I'm very excited to share it with you. This listener has given me their permission. However, I'm telling you nothing about them right now because I need to double check and find out if they're okay with me using their actual name or not. But once I've nailed that down, I promise you, this is one amazing story, and you will hear it. Alright, on to the business at hand today. We have arrived at part 2 of Where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, Mastermind of the Antwerp Diamond Heist. Notice that I said part 2, so if you haven't heard part 1 yet, which came out on Thursday, please go back and listen to it, and then rejoin us. I'll save you a seat. The key source for this episode is the Wired magazine article by Joshua Davis entitled The Untold Story of the World's Biggest Diamond Heist. As always, my sources are in the show notes, and today I will rewind the story just a little bit to let you settle back into the narrative before we launch into this second part. So now, if you're ready, I suggest that you put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you, stow your carry-on in the overhead compartment, let go of the cares of the day, but be sure your seatbelt is fastened. There's turbulence expected ahead. Kinda Murdery's Where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, Mastermind of the Antwerp Diamond Heist, Part 2, starts now. Like any Hollywood heist movie that you may already be familiar with, the Antwerp diamond robbery ultimately had 2 key components. And what were those components? Well, in a sense, this would be the classic showdown between an immovable object and an unstoppable force. Meaning, like with any heist, there would be a target, the immovable object, and an unstoppable force. And that unstoppable force was Notarbartolo's crew, a team of larger-than-life, expert thieves, each with his own highly evocative nickname ripped straight from the pages of a screenplay. But before we cover the crew, let's take a look at the target. The Antwerp Diamond Center vault was protected by 10 layers of security. There was the door, which had number 1, a combination dial 0 to 99, number 2, a keyed lock, number 3, a built-in seismic sensor, number 4, a locked steel grate, number 5, a magnetic sensor, and number 6, exterior security cameras. Once you made it through the door and into the vault, a Herculean task on its own, then your job was not done, because now there were the countermeasures built into the vault itself. These were measures 7 through 10. Number 7, a keypad for disarming sensors. Number 8, a light sensor. Number 9, an internal security camera. And number 10, heat and motion sensors. Sounds like a near impossible job. And yet, with less than half the membership of the famed cinematic antiheroes, the Notarbartolo 5 put the fictional super thieves from Ocean's 11 to shame. Who were the Notarbartolo 5? Well, there was the Mastermind, Leonardo Notarbartolo himself. Then there was Speedy, Notarbartolo's longtime friend, described as an anxious and paranoid man. He was the one responsible for scattering the trash in the woods, and the nickname Speedy was most likely the alias of Pietro Tavano. Next up was the Monster, a tall, muscular man. He was apparently an expert lockpicker, electrician, mechanic, and driver, and he was very, very strong. The Monster was most likely the alias of Ferdinando Finotto. Next up was the Genius, a specialist in alarm robberies, most likely the alias of Simon, an electronics expert known to be linked to a series of robberies. And finally, the King of Keys, an older man, described as one of the best key forgers in the world. His true identity is unknown, and he remains the only member of the crew to escape apprehension by the police. It took 5 months for the diamond dealer to call back after Notarbartolo told him the heist was impossible. He'd even given him photographs to prove it. Notarbartolo thought that would be the end of it, but now the dealer wanted to meet at an address outside Antwerp. When Notarbartolo arrived, the dealer was waiting for him in front of an abandoned warehouse. "I want to introduce you to some people," he said, unlocking the battered front door. Inside, a massive structure was covered with black plastic tarps. The dealer pulled back a corner, and they ducked underneath. At first, Notarbartolo was confused. He seemed to be standing in the vault antechamber. To his left, he saw the vault door. He was inside an exact replica of the Diamond Center's vault level. Everything was the same. As far as Notarbartolo could tell, the dealer had reconstructed it based on the photographs he'd provided. Notarbartolo felt like he'd stepped into a movie. Inside the fake vault, 3 Italians were having a quiet conversation. They stopped talking when they saw the dealer and Notarbartolo. The dealer introduced them, though Notarbartolo in his conversations with Davis refused to reveal their names, referring to them only by nicknames. Nicknames that you heard a moment ago. There was the Genius, who specialized in alarm systems. According to the dealer, he could disable any kind of alarm. "You can disable this?" Notarbartolo asked, pointing at the replica vault. "I can disable most of it. You're going to have to do 1 or 2 things yourself, though." The tall, muscular man was the Monster. He was called that because he was monstrously good at everything he did. He was an expert lockpicker, electrician, mechanic, and driver, and had enormous physical strength. Everybody was a little scared of him, which was another reason for the nickname. The King of Keys was a quiet, older man. His age set him apart from the others. He looked like somebody's grandfather. The diamond dealer said that the wizened locksmith was among the best key forgers in the world. One of his contributions was to duplicate the nearly impossible to duplicate, foot-long vault key. "Just get me a clear video of it," the man told Notarbartolo. "I'll do the rest." "That's not so easy," Notarbartolo pointed out. The King of Keys shrugged. That wasn't his problem. "Don't worry," said the Genius. "I'll help." In September 2002, a guard stepped up to the vault door and began to spin the combination wheel. It was 7 a.m. He was right, on schedule. Directly above his head and invisible behind the glare of recessed light, a fingertip-sized video camera captured his every move. With each spin, the combination came to rest on a number. A small antenna broadcast the image. Nearby, in a storage room beside the vault, an ordinary-looking red fire extinguisher was strapped to the wall. The extinguisher was fully functional, but a watertight compartment inside housed electronics that picked up and recorded the video signal. When the guard finished dialing the combination, he inserted the vault key. The video camera recorded a sharp image of it before it disappeared inside the keyhole. He spun the handle and the vault door swung open. Thursday morning, February 13th, 2003, 2 days before the heist. The thud, thud, thud of a police helicopter beat over a convoy of police cars escorting an armored truck through the heart of Antwerp. They blew past posters of Venus Williams. She was due in town to compete in the Proximus Diamond Games tennis tournament. The escorts bristled with firepower. They belonged to a special diamond delivery protection unit, and each cop carried a fully automatic weapon. Their cargo? De Beers' monthly shipment of diamonds, worth millions. De Beers is the largest diamond mining company in the world. In 2003, it controlled 55% of the global diamond supply and operated mines in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, among others. The rough, unpolished gems were flown to London, where they were divided and placed into 120 boxes, one for each official De Beers distributor, many of whom were headquartered in Antwerp. Every month, Antwerp's share of the boxes was flown into Belgium and transferred to a Brinks armored truck. Once the truck's doors slammed shut, the convoy sped away, sirens wailing. The vehicles rocketed past the guard gate at the entrance of the district, and the giant metal cylinders rose out of the ground behind them, blocking any further automotive access. The armed escorts fanned out on foot around the armored truck to form a perimeter. No one was allowed near the vehicle. The doors swung open, and the boxes were quickly carried through an unremarkable entrance in the middle of the block. It was payday, and the Diamond District was flush. Notarbartolo was buzzed into the vault the next day, Friday, February 14th, the day before the robbery. He was alone. In his jacket pocket, he carried a can of women's hairspray. Notarbartolo used women's hairspray to temporarily disable the vault's combined heat and motion sensor. A security camera recorded his movements. Police would later watch the footage, but the guard had gotten used to the Italian's frequent visits and wasn't paying attention. Notarbartolo stepped away from the safe deposit boxes and pulled out the aerosol can. With a quick, practiced circular movement, he covered the combined heat and motion sensor with a thin coat of transparent, oily mist. The vault was momentarily filled with the smell of a woman's hair. It was a simple but effective hack. The oily film would temporarily insulate the sensor from fluctuations in the room's temperature, and the alarm went off only if the sensor sensed both heat and motion. Still, it was hard to guess how long the trick would work. Once the monster was in the vault, he had to install the sensor bypass before his body heat penetrated the film. He might have 5 minutes, he might have less. Nobody knew for sure. Elsewhere, Venus Williams smashed the ball cross-court with a yelp, overwhelming her leggy Slovakian opponent. It was Saturday night, and Williams was dominating the semifinals of the Diamond Games, an event that hyped Antwerp's predominant position in the gem world. Many of the city's diamond dealers watched as Williams beat down the Slovak and moved one step closer to winning a tennis racket encrusted with nearly $1 million worth of stones. Now, I don't play tennis, but Jiminy Christmas, even I would want that tennis racket, wouldn't you? Across town, the Diamond District was deserted. Notarbartolo drove his rented gray Peugeot 307 past the city's soot-covered central train station and turned onto the Pelikanstraat, a road that skirted the district. He pulled up to the curb, and the monster, the genius, the king of keys, and, of course, Speedy, stepped out carrying large duffel bags. The king of keys picked the lock on a run-down office building, and they disappeared through the door. It was a little past midnight. The genius led them out the rear of the building into a private garden that abutted the back of the Diamond Center. It was one of the few places in the district that wasn't under video surveillance. Using a ladder he'd previously hidden there, the genius climbed up to a small terrace on the second floor. A heat-sensing infrared detector monitored the terrace, but he approached it slowly from behind a large homemade polyester shield. The low thermal conductivity of the polyester blocked his body heat from reaching the center. He placed the shield directly in front of the detector, preventing it from sensing anything. The balcony was now safe. While the rest of the team scrambled up, the genius disabled an alarm sensor on one of the balcony's windows. One by one, the thieves climbed through the window, dropped into a stairwell, and descended to the darkened vault antechamber. They covered the security cameras with black plastic bags and flipped on the lights. The vault door stood imposingly before them. The building was quiet. No alarms had been triggered. The police never determined how the men had entered the building. The genius pulled a custom-made slab of a rigid aluminum out of his bag and affixed heavy-duty double-sided tape to one side. He stuck it on the 2 plates that regulated the magnetic field on the right side of the vault door and unscrewed their bolts. The magnetic plates were now loose, but the sticky aluminum held them together, allowing the genius to pivot them out of the way and tape them to the antechamber wall. The plates were still side by side and active. The magnetic field never wavered, but they no longer monitored the door. Some 30 hours later, the authorities would marvel at the ingenuity. The genius used this custom-made slab of aluminum to reposition the magnetic field away from the vault door. Next, the King of Keys played out a hunch. In Notarbartolo's videos, the guard usually visited a utility room just before opening the vault. When the thieves searched the room, they found a major security lapse. The original vault key was hanging inside. Oh my goodness, really? So they had a key that was essentially impossible to duplicate, and yet the guards, at the location of the most valuable hoard of diamonds in the world, basically hung the unduplicatable key on the wall like it was a mailbox key by your door or my door? Holy freaking moly. The King of Keys grabbed the original. There was no point in letting the safe manufacturers know that their precious key could be copied, and the police still don't know that a duplicate was made. The King of Keys slotted the original into the keyhole and waited while the genius dialed in the combination that had been gleaned from the video. A moment later, the genius nodded. The monster turned off the lights. They didn't want to trigger the light detector in the vault when the door opened. In the darkness, the King of Keys turned the key and spun a 4-pronged handle. The bolts that secured the door retracted, and it swung heavily open. Speedy ran up the stairwell. It was his job to stay in touch with Notarbartolo, but there was no cell phone reception down in the vault. Upstairs, he got a signal and dialed his old friend. "We're in," he said, and hung up. Notarbartolo put his phone back on the dashboard. He was sitting in the Peugeot and could see the front of the diamond center a block and a half away. His police scanner was quiet. He took a sip of cold coffee and waited. In the antechamber, the King of Keys deftly picked the lock on the metal grate. He shuffled backward as the monster propped the grate open with 2 cans of paint he'd found in the storeroom. Like the rest of the team, the monster wore plastic gloves. The police would find no prints on the can. It was now up to him to disable the remaining systems. The monster oriented himself in the darkness at the vault entrance. The only sound was the steady breathing of the others behind him. His body was already projecting heat into the vault. The hairspray on the infrared sensor wouldn't last. Every second he was there, he would raise the ambient temperature. He had to move quickly, but also he had to keep his heart rate low. The monster bypassed the vault security system's main inbound and outbound wires and then covered the light sensor with tape, rendering it useless. As he'd practiced in the warehouse, he strode exactly 11 steps into the middle of the room, reached for the ceiling and pushed back a panel. He felt the security system's main inbound and outbound wires. An automatic electric pulse constantly shot into the room and back out along these wires. If any of the sensors were tripped, the circuit would break. When a pulse shot into the room, it expected an answer. If it didn't get one, it activated the alarm. With his hands over his head, the monster used a tool to strip the plastic coating off the wires. It was a delicate task. One slip could cut through, instantly breaking the circuit and tripping the alarm. The police would later discover stripped wires in the ceiling and guessed that the thieves considered cutting them, only to lose their nerve. But Notarbartolo says the monster knew exactly what he was doing. Once the copper wires were exposed, he clipped a new, pre-cut piece of wire between the inbound and outbound cables. The bridge rerouted the incoming electrical pulse over to the outbound wire before the signal reached the sensors. It no longer mattered what happened further down the line. The sensors were out of the loop. It was now safe for the others to enter. Still, the men were cautious. They blinded the heat and motion sensor detector with a styrofoam box, covered the light detector with tape, and then set to work. The King of Keys unloaded a homemade, hand-cranked drill and fitted it with a thin shaft of metal. He jammed the shaft into one of the locks and cranked for about 3 minutes, until the lock broke, snapping open the box. The guys took turns yanking the contents out. Since they'd memorized the layout of the vault and the replica, they worked in the dark, turning on their flashlights only for split seconds, enough to position the drill over the next box. But in those muffled flashes, they could glimpse their duffel bags overflowing with gold bars, millions in Israeli, Swiss, American, European, and British currency, and leather satchels that contained the mother lode, rough and polished diamonds. They resisted the urge to examine their haul. They were running out of time. By 5:30 a.m., they'd opened 109 boxes. A tamped-down giddiness pervaded the dark vault, but they had to stop. The streets would fill with people soon, and they needed to transfer their bags into Notarbartolo's car. Speedy relayed the message to him. They were coming out. It took almost an hour for the team to haul the bags up the stairs past the infrared sensor, then lower the loot down the ladder and gather in the hallway of the decrepit office building. Notarbartolo idled at the curb while on the phone with Speedy. A bus came and went, and then the street was empty. "Now!" he hissed. In the pre-dawn half-light, the four men raced out of the building. They jammed their bags into the car, slammed the doors, and headed off on foot for Notarbartolo's apartment. He put the car in gear and slowly pulled away. In half an hour, they were huddled around the bags in the apartment. The monster unzipped one and pulled out a leather satchel. It was time to celebrate. He opened the satchel and looked up, bewildered. It was empty. He took out another one. It was also empty. A wave of anxiety swept the room. They unzipped all the other duffel bags and rifled through the satchels. More often than not, there was nothing in them. Something had gone wrong. The diamonds should have been there. "We've been set up," Notarbartolo said. "And if you'd like to find out what's going on with all these empty diamond satchels and just how they've been set up, then please do join me again on Thursday, January 5th, for Part 3, the thrilling conclusion of Where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, Mastermind of the Antwerp Diamond Heist. Until Thursday, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. Happy New Year, everybody.